Lady Antonio, as Tom said, I work with Trimarine in the sustainability department, but I've been with Trimarine for about 7 years. But I was on the commercial side of the first 6 years. So here I am presenting on behalf of Matt, who is currently unavailable at the moment. So here we go. So I wanted to present to you an introductory video that the Seafood Task Force just posted on their website. So the Seafood Task Force is a unique multi-stakeholder alliance consisting of European and American retailers, the suppliers, NGOs, and major type shrimp processors and feed companies. Currently, there are 36 commercial members, overall 60 members. The task force overarching objective is supply chain oversight of people, product, and process, as mentioned in the video. The Seafood Task Force strategy is to focus on illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, or IUU, because STF believes that social and environmental issues are closely linked to IUU. The task force is divided into 9 subgroups, and each subgroup is focused on delivering individual work plans geared to ensure that the task force meets its overarching objective. Subgroup 7 is the Tuna Oversight subgroup, and here is our social compliance program. The foundation of our compliance program is the Code of Conduct and Auditable Standards, which we will discuss in depth in the next few slides. The Code of Conduct and Auditable Standards was completed in 2017 and is available in English, Thai, traditional Chinese, Korean, and Spanish. So the next phase was outreach and training, where we introduced the Code of Conduct to relevant stakeholders. STF and SG7, or the subgroup 7, members like Trimarine, FCF, Bumblebee, and Thai Union all helped facilitate and launch the Code of Conduct and hosted an introductory outreach session in Kaohsiung, Taiwan in April 2019, where we had about 120 plus participants consisting of vessel owners, of longliners, purseaners, squid vessels, and some representatives from the government of Taiwan. So we'll discuss the implementation, verification, and remediation at the end of the slide deck and jump into the Code of Conduct and Audit Standards for tuna vessels. The Code of Conduct is the overarching policy of the STF and is a set of social and health and safety standards developed and adapted by the task force, and is to be applied to all parts of the seafood supply chain of task force members. These are publicly shared and available on their website. So the code consists of 15 basic principles, and we'll discuss each principle in the next slides. First principle is child labor. This principle is intended to prevent underage labor on vessels and to provide a safe mechanism for removal of underage workers who may have been unknowingly hired. SDF strictly prohibits the use of child labor, and the term child refers to any person under the age of 15 or under the age of completing compulsory education or under the minimum age of employment in the country, whichever is higher. And for sea-based workers, tuna vessels, the code prohibits employment on vessels of anyone under the age of 18 or where national law sets a stricter limit at the legally mandated age. So for compliance, employers must have a written policy prohibiting underage labor, a clear procedure for age documentation, examples of which are passports, national ID, work permit, birth certificate, and in the absence of these legal documents, we've seen some workers who provided a transcript of records that shows their date of birth or maybe bank statements or bank accounts that have their date of birth. But most of the time, they're able to provide their passport or national ID or birth certificate. And a procedure for safely protecting and removing any underage worker who may have been unknowingly hired. So labor remediation steps and best practices is something that vessel owners or employers should have as part of the compliance for child labor. So we'll move on to principle 2, forced labor. STF prohibits all forms of forced labor in modern slavery, including bonded labor, indentured labor, prison labor, or human trafficking. This includes transporting, harboring, recruiting, transferring, or receiving persons by means of threat, force, coercion, abduction, or fraud for labor or services. All work must be voluntary, and workers shall have the freedom to terminate their employment at any time without penalty, in line with prevailing laws and regulations. And for sea-based work, freedom to terminate their contract is exercised at the next regularly scheduled port visit. So the principle of forced labor is intended to provide a mechanism to eliminate the possibility of workers being forced to work on tuna vessels. So for compliance measures, worker contracts and policies must be available and explained in a language understandable to them. A written policy prohibiting the use of forced, bonded, indentured, penal, and slave for traffic labor should be enforced. An explicit human resources policy on recruitment contracts, wages, working hours, including their rights to overtime work must be available. A clear procedure for explaining contract conditions to employees must also be available. The next principle is employment contracts. First, the principle of voluntariness and informed consent, which are both critical to avoiding forced labor, can be best secured using clear, transparent, and legal employment contracts. Contracts protect the rights of both employee and employer, and the employer must not include hidden aspects or clauses in the contracts that take advantage of the worker. The Seafood Task Force requires all new hires be issued written contracts that are explained to them in a language they fully understand, clearly indicating their rights and responsibilities and conditions of employment, including wages, benefits, working hours, location of the work, living conditions, housing and associated costs, work-related hazards, and other working and employment conditions. Workers shall be provided with a copy of the signed employment contract prior to employment. Workers with difficulty understanding the written contract shall be given a verbal explanation of the contract's terms and conditions. So the use of supplemental agreements and the practice of contract substitution to replace an original contract or any fixed provision with another new contract for terms that are less favorable to the worker is strictly prohibited. Workers shall not be penalized for termination of their employment contract upon giving the required notice within 10 days. The required notice period for workers to terminate their contract shall not exceed what the law requires or 1 month if there is no law applies. Principle 4 is freedom of movement and personal freedom. A red flag for forced labor in modern slavery is any restriction on an employment's freedom of movement. Workers' freedom of movement shall not be unreasonably restricted. Workers shall not be physically confined to the workplace or in premises, such as employer or recruiter-operated residences, nor shall any other coercive means be used to restrict workers' freedom of movement or personal freedom. Mandatory residence in an employer-provided or arranged facility shall not be made a condition of employment unless required by law. The lock-in is preventing workers from leaving. Sometimes vessel owners or employers would have security guards on the facility or on the vessel. Mandated housing are mandatory residences in employer-provided or arranged facilities. Basic necessities are clean drinking water, food, and toilet. Note, while there is no requirement for a written plan for avoiding freedom of movement or for personal freedom on tuna vessels, employers should evaluate their practices and make sure they do not knowingly or unknowingly physically or otherwise restrict employees' movement. All personnel responsible for any supervisory role should be aware of the vessel practices in regard to freedom. So here's an example. It's a curfew practice. It should be in a language workers understand. It should not be limiting freedom of movement of workers. And on this sample, no clear information for the reason of applying this practice. So it should have a clear reason so that workers would understand why there is a curfew practice. Possible reasons for curfew on board for safety and protection of crew members. Another example of reasonable restriction on board vessels probably would be restricting access to engine rooms or fish refrigerators. These are permissible if these are for the protection of employees and the vessel or the product. Next is retention of personal documents. Another form of forced labor in modern slavery, and also a form of restriction of movement, is the retention of employees' personal documents. Oftentimes, the fear of losing personal documents effectively prevents workers from leaving their employer. The Seafood Task Force requires all employers to ensure that employees and applicants retain full and complete control over original copies of their personal documents. Confiscating, destroying, withholding, or otherwise denying workers access to their identity or immigration documents, including work permits and travel documentation such as passports, is strictly prohibited. And for sea-based workers, in case where personal documents are given to both captains for safekeeping during sea-based work, workers must receive their documents once docked or at any time requested. So for compliance, here's a sample of compliance for vessels, a written policy with procedures to avoid abuse of the workers' rights to access personal documents. Workers must also be given copies of the documents held legally and assured immediate return upon request. A policy statement must explain all aspects of how the boat operator will assure that the employer's rights related to personal documents will not be infringed upon. So those are just a few of the compliance that vessel owners should be following. 6 are recruitment fees. Its principle, responsible recruitment is a critical component to ending debt, bondage, and thereby reducing forced labor. Workers shall not be required to pay recruitment, hiring related fees to employers, agents, or labor broker outside of legally allowed fees. All fees charged to workers must be disclosed in advance and documented in a language that workers understand. Recruitment fees include any fee or cost incurred in the recruitment process of workers. There are some situations in which the worker may be legally required to pay fees to a labor broker or directly to the employer. In such cases, the fees must not exceed the legal limit. So compliance with this principle of the SDF code requires written policies and clear procedures that demonstrate that workers shall only pay legally allowed fees in accordance with Seafood Task Force guidance and responsibility for recruitment-related costs. For example, written policies and procedures, workers' transportation costs from home country in return will be paid by the employer. It should also state workers are not charged any recruitment fees, hiring-related fees outside legally allowed fees. There must be monitoring systems in place to assure that no fees have been charged illegally, and there must be a repayment mechanism for fees that may have been charged in addition to legally allowed fees. Number 7 is humane treatment. In alignment with international standards and conventions, the Seafood Task Force recognizes all human beings' inherent dignity and requires that each person be treated with respect. This requirement extends to all workplaces and prohibits any form of abuse or inhumane treatment by the employer, both in their own operations and when engaging with suppliers, agents, and other business partners. So when exercising discipline in the workplace, employers must be careful to only use disciplinary measures that are legal and that in no way infringe on an employee's dignity. No worker shall be subject to any physical, sexual, psychological, or verbal harassment, abuse, violence, or intimidation. Any disciplinary action exceeding legal restrictions, such as imposing work or legal fines, wage deductions, and reduction in benefits as means of disciplinary action are strictly prohibited. As a best practice, all disciplinary measures should be held in writing, and the employer should record and keep on file any disciplinary measures taken against an employee. Number 8 is workplace equality. All workers, regardless of nationality, legal status, or other personal characteristics, shall be treated fairly and equally. Unless otherwise required by law, migrant workers shall benefit from conditions of work no less or more favorable than those available to country nationals, including but not limited to wages, benefits, and accommodation. Accordingly, the Seafood Task Force requires employers to respect each employee and provide the same set of conditions in the workplace, regardless of personal characteristics. Employees must be selected simply on the basis of their ability to do a job and not on any other grounds. Special note on migrant workers. So the Seafood Task Force recognizes that the seafood industry relies strongly on migrant workers and requires special attention to be given to this group. Migrant workers are more vulnerable to exploitation or otherwise discriminated against, especially in cases where they may have illegal or restricted employment status. Nevertheless, apart from specific legal restrictions, employers must strive to ensure that migrants and local employees' conditions of work do not differ and not only favorable to some and not all workers. The ninth principle of the Code of Conduct is freedom of association. The employers respect the rights of workers to associate and bargain collectively and enable workers to exercise their rights in accordance with applicable law. Unless otherwise restricted by law, the employer allows alternative means of independent and free association and bargaining for all such workers, such as worker representatives and worker welfare committees. The Seafood Task Force requires employers to comply with all applicable laws that pertain to freedom of association and collective bargaining to ensure no discrimination takes place on the basis of any such affiliations. This means that employers need to understand workers' rights and freedom to join or not join any labor association in the operating country or in the sending country whenever migrant workers are employed. Where employees choose to organize, employers should not in any way interfere with this process. So such as in collective bargaining, it protects workers' hours, fair wages, benefits, their working conditions, or the rules of workplace. And rights to organize, workers have the right to form or join participate in a peaceful assembly. So that's the key for their peaceful assembly. Employers shall comply with applicable laws and cannot interfere in any way with workers' right to organize. Number 10 in the Code of Conduct is the principle of grievance procedure. Good and effective grievance management can be crucial to maintain order and a respectful working environment. A safe environment for employees to communicate issues is a critical means to identify potential labor abuses and remediate these effectively. Oppositely, preventing employees from communicating grievances, or if employees feel this is unsafe to do so, may contribute to problems amongst the workforce and decreasing productivity. The Seafood Task Force requires an effective, confidential grievance process shall be established that provide a means by which any worker acting individually or with other workers can submit a grievance without suffering prejudice or retaliation of any kind. The grievance procedure shall include a non-retaliatory appeals process for workers who disagree with how a grievance was resolved. So here are samples of several mechanisms that the vessels can apply. So in person, they can file a formal report to the captain or supervisor. There would be some labor or work representatives on board where workers can report to. Field representatives at port, when they dock, they can report in person. Some vessels would have worker voice apps, apps that allow questions in multiple language to be asked through an audio recording. These are answered through a smartphone and saved on a server, and the data collected by the app is anonymous. And also, some employers would have a grievance mechanism through email. And the traditional means is a third-party hotline, dedicated company hotline, or a third party. So although effective grievance mechanisms are a cornerstone of good workplace relations, employers should remember that the mere lack of grievance submission does not necessarily mean that no issues are occurring on site. Workers should regardless be encouraged to always actively communicate with supervisor and amongst each other. The 11th principle is wages and benefits. The wage and benefit principle of the STF code is intended to assure that workers are given fair pay and benefits for the work that they perform and in compliance with existing national wage and benefit laws. The Seafood Task Force requires all employers to pay wages as stipulated in the employment contract and at least legally required minimum wage to each worker, as well as all legally mandated benefits. Where employees are made up of a migrant workforce, employers must make sure that the minimum wage paid exceeds at least the legal minimum wage of their sending country and that all benefits required in the sending country are paid to the employee and not to the broker. So pay frequency, wage payment shall be made at regular intervals, but not less than once a month, and directly to workers in accordance with applicable law and shall not be delayed, deferred, or withheld. To most vessels, their fishing trip would last more than a month, and they should be paid at least once a month and not at the end of the fishing trip. So for pay slips, it's important for workers to receive detailed pay slips with their base wages, their allowances, any deductions or overtime rates, overtime incurred, additional earnings such as bonuses or profit shares, and pay period should be clearly written and specified on the pay slip. We've seen several cases where pay slips only show the name of the worker, total amount, and pay period. So here are some of the workers' rights regarding wages and benefits. Workers have full retention and complete control over their earnings. They have the freedom to dispose of their wages as they choose. Workers shall not be held in debt bondage. They should not be forced to work in order to pay debt, and workers are not required to participate in forced mandatory savings to recoup recruitment costs. 12th principle of the code is working hours. The Seafood Task Force requires all employers to ensure that workers are not required to work in excess of the number of hours permitted by applicable laws and/or collective agreements, whichever affords the greater level of protection for the workers. Employment contracts must contain clear information of working hours, arrangement for workers in the language they understand. Documenting regular working hours, including overtime hours, can be challenging to maintain in the fishing industry due to the nature of their work. However, an accurate fishing logbook can be very useful and beneficial for both employer and employees to systematically demonstrate that workers receive break times and rest days in accordance with the law and other standards applied. I'd like to emphasize that STF recognizes that demands on the vessel may require variations from a schedule that provides for regular periods of rest. Under those circumstances, such variations shall be reasonable and compensatory periods of rest shall be made available to fishers as soon as practicable. STF also states that all overtime shall be voluntary. No worker shall be made to work overtime under the threat of penalty, dismissal, or denunciation to authorities. So overtime as a disciplinary measure is strictly prohibited. So for working vessels, working hours for vessels, remaining at sea for more than 3 days, working hour requirements are as follows. Unless stricter limits are set by applicable law, minimum hours of rest should be 10 hours in any 24-hour period, average 77 hours per week over the entire duration of the trip. 10 hours of rest per day may be reduced to no less than 6 hours during active fish catching and fish processing, and fishers shall receive compensatory periods of rest as soon as practicable. Thirteenth would be worker awareness and training. The purpose of this principle is to assure that workers are knowledgeable at the time of hiring about the term of their contracts and the employer's expectation of them. Workers also must be given training about living and working conditions. STF code states workers must be made aware of their rights and responsibilities at the time of hire, including the terms and conditions of their employment contract, the provisions of this code and all applicable laws and regulations of their home country, the country where the work is to be performed, and of any country and jurisdiction contracting the work. Workers must be trained upon arrival in the receiving country on the employer's workplace rules and procedures. The grievance process should be explained to them, the housing arrangement, if provided or arranged by the employer, and the conditions of work, including any health and safety hazards, and the precautions needed to protect the personal safety. So how can employers ensure that workers are fully aware of all relevant working conditions before starting employment? So employers make sure that all information is provided in a language that employees understand. Reviewing all written information in detail with employees. Some employees may not be good readers, so oral review makes sure all information is understood. Providing opportunities for employees to ask clarifying questions and confirm they fully understand everything, and select the right format to convey information to employees. Some information will be covered in brief sessions. Other information may require more formalized forms of training. What do employees need to be informed about before starting work? So all legal rights and responsibilities that apply to the employee in both the sending and host country, as well as relevant applicable legal requirements from the jurisdiction contracting the work. Terms and conditions of the employment contract, the requirements set by the Seafood Task Force Code of Conduct, living conditions where applicable, employer policies, rules, and procedures, including policies on child labor, forced labor, employment contracts, freedom of movement, their retention of personal documents, recruitment fees, against abuse and harassment, non-discrimination, health and safety. We should have grievance mechanism, health and safety hazards, and requirements. So this training should be evaluated regularly by employers to understand whether information has been properly conveyed. This can be done through surveys, brief interviews, or short tests. So next is private employment agencies and recruiters. Responsible recruitment is a key factor in ensuring that forced labor and modern slavery do not take place. Private employment agencies, recruiters, and labor brokers play a crucial role in the fishing industry by ensuring a reliable supply of labor. Given the elevated risk when using external recruiters due to a lack of clear oversight and control over recruitment process, the Seafood Task Force strongly encourages employers to instead opt for direct hiring where possible. This means that employers themselves take on the responsibility of posting relevant job advertisements, inviting applicants for interviews, and ultimately selecting and hiring the right candidates. This assures the employer that all necessary steps are being taken to minimize opportunities for forced labor situation and unethical recruitment practices. It is understood that direct hiring is not always possible for a variety of reasons, and that this is especially in the case of high seas fishing. So when the subcontracting of recruitment and hiring is necessary, employers should ensure that the labor agencies they engage with operate legally and are certified or licensed by the competent authority in their country of operation. They do not charge the worker illegal recruitment fees. They do not engage in fraudulent recruitment practices and do not engage in job scams. Here are some steps to adopt when working with recruitment agencies. So employers and the recruitment agency should sign a formal contract, share the policy, do not charge illegal recruitment fees. Employers should communicate the STF standards to recruitment agents. Agency training for new hires should be provided, communicate working conditions to job seekers, and develop an internal monitoring system. The last of the code would be health and safety. The fishing industry is very high risk, and fishing is considered one of the most dangerous jobs in the world, with the ILO and FAO estimating that 7% of all fatalities occur in the fishing industry, a rate that increases in proportion when considering that it accounts for less than 1% of the global workforce. So in the US, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, fishers and related fishing workers is the second most dangerous and hazardous job in 2019. Logging workers are the first, aircraft pilots and flight engineers are coming third. Fishing activities, therefore, require special attention on the part of employers to ensure that employees can perform their work safely and securely, and that their working living environments do not pose any risk or threat to their health. All employees are entitled to work in safe working places that do not expose them to undue risk of life and limb. Employers must abide by local applicable regulations and industry standards as they pertain to the following health and safety measures shown on this slide. Employers shall provide workers with safe and hygienic working and living environments, paying special attention to prevention of accidents and incidences, management of identified hazards, fire safety, emergency procedures, worker training, first aid and access to medical services, personnel, protective equipment, equipment and electrical safety training, noise, lighting and ventilation, sanitation, access to clean drinking water and hygienic food prep areas. At minimum, employers must ensure that workplaces are as safe as possible and that, where required, a vessel and vessel operator have obtained all legally required licenses and permits and undergone all required vessel inspection by relevant authorities. So those are the 15 code of conduct. seafood task force. So we'll jump into, if you remember the slide where I showed subgroup 7 social compliance program overview. So the next step in the compliance program are implementation, verification, and remediation. So the implementation phase consists of 2 tools. First is a 40-page Tuna handbook in PDF format. This is a resource document for tuna fishing vessel owners and operators to assist in implementing best practices to comply with Seafood Task Force requirements. It provides step-by-step instructions on what policies, procedures, and overall operational practices are necessary to comply with the code, and it contains an introductory and executive summary, a chapter for each of the code principles that we just discussed, all 15 of them, explanation of each SCF code, and their required records and documents presented as individual sections. And also the handbook offers sample policy language templates and best practices for compliance with the Seafood Task Force. Links to relevant documents such as the Seafood Task Force Tuna Vessel Auditable Standard Guidance is also included in the handbook. So this handbook was completed 2 weeks ago, I think March 17th. It's available currently in English, but the Seafood Task Force Secretariat is working on translating it to 5 different languages. It will be translated into Mandarin, Indonesian, Vietnamese, Korean, and Spanish. So those are the first 5, but eventually if there's a need to translate it to other languages, then we could discuss it. It can be discussed with the Seafood Task Force Secretariat. The beauty about the handbook is that it provides vessel owners sample policy templates that they can easily adapt. Here is an example of the policy on humane treatment. So as you can see, it's ready to be used. They could just use it and adapt it and put their company name and signatures on it. So the handbook offers more than 12 sample policies and procedures that can be implemented and used by the vessel owners. So it's part of the annex of the handbook. This is ready for distribution, but again, as I mentioned, it's only available in English. So for most of our suppliers, most are Taiwanese vessels, so we are going to wait for the Mandarin or the traditional Chinese translation of the handbook. The second tool in the implementation phase is the Self-Assessment Questionnaire, or SAQ. It is a compliance, readiness, or validation tool developed for vessel owners and operators to self-assess current practices against the code requirements. The SAQ allows vessel owners to identify gaps in their processes and develop corrective action plans to drive continuous improvement. So this is in a Word format where you could provide this to your vessel suppliers and have them self-assess their processes against the Seafood Task Force code. And this will allow them to be ready and prepared for third-party vessel audits, which is the next phase in our tuna vessel compliance program, verification through third-party vessel audits. So auditors will be using the Seafood Task Force assessment reporting tool, here is shown on the slide, which contains an assessment checklist for verification of compliance against the Code of Conduct, and it is intended for use by third-party auditors or assessors. The report also contains a grading matrix which identifies risk levels assigned to each non-compliance or non-conformity and recommended closure timeframe. The corrective action document documents all non-conformities and suggested closure timeframes based on grading matrix recommendations, and this is intended to be used for vessel and buyers to set goals and develop a continuous improvement plan. And the final step in the tuna compliance program is the remediation through a corrective action plan, which served as a building block in developing the remediation and continuous improvement process for vessels. So it is highly recommended that STF program managers work with their supplier vessels in completing the corrective action plan and ensure non-conformances are closed and addressed. Okay, that's it. Thank you. Thank you for wearing, because I was just telling Tom that originally the slide presentation was originally about 80 slides. So I had to work on it and condense it to 30, less than 40 slides and make sure that I don't go beyond 50 or 60-minute mark. So if you have any questions.
That's fantastic. Thank you so much. You did really, really well. I hope you found that extremely interesting. I certainly did. It was good to see it laid out like that. We've already got one question, which is great, on the chat. But if you do have any other questions, please feel free to type them in the chat, or when I've finished, just shout out. So the first question we've got is, what are the employees' responsibilities for workers' medical care?
Sorry, say that again, Tom. It kind of froze up a little bit.
Yeah, no problem. What are the employer's responsibilities for workers' medical care?
Medical care. Oh, that's based on the legally mandated laws. So they have to work with the flag state in the country of operation.
Okay, thank you.
And also the code of conduct, I just want to tell everybody that a copy of the code of conduct is available on the website, as shown here on the slide. And there are other resources available on the Seafood Task Force website if anybody is interested.
Does any of our participants have any comments or questions?
Hi, Tom and Lady. It's Chloe North from MRAG here.
Hello.
Hi. Thanks so much, Lady. That was definitely a lot of information.
I know.
Yeah, the 80 slide presentation must have been amazing.
Yeah.
From MRAG's point of view, as an auditing body, what does an auditing body have to do to be approved to conduct these audits?
To be approved to conduct these audits, there's no requirement, as long as the vessels, in our case, you'll have to work with the tuna companies. They could choose you as their third-party auditors. In some cases where our customers would require the auditors to be APSCA certified, but I don't think that's a general requirement from all customers to be third-party auditors to be able to audit, as long as the auditors use the tools, the self-assessment tool. Sorry, the third-party auditing tools, and audit against the Seafood Task Force code, would be good.
Great, thanks very much.
I have another question for you. The Seafood Task Force is focused on Thailand at the moment. Is it planned to extend this approach to other countries and other areas?
Yes, it is. Right now, so for the tuna vessel oversight, our main focus is on Thailand, but we are aware of high risk places of employment, especially for Indonesian workers. So we'll be expanding, and that should be available on the website as well.
Great, thank you. We've had a follow-up question on the employee medical responsibilities. How would the employee know the flag state's legal requirements for medical care?
That should be available. The employer should include that in the contract. Let's say for Taiwanese vessels, information is available through the Taiwanese agent, and also available online on Taiwanese Fisheries Agency's website.
Okay, are they going to, with the skipper or the vessel owner, make that information sort of proactively available to the employee?
They should also, yes, yeah. That should be part of the training that the skippers should provide to the staff or to the vessel workers.
Okay, thank you. A couple of other questions have come in. Have there been discussions with other organizations which are developing vessel standards, such as the Responsible Fishing Vessel Scheme, the OPAGAC scheme, on some forms of working together or collaboration or sort of cross-auditing?
I'm sorry, I don't know the answer to that, but I can definitely go back to that question, Tom. And if you could write down who asked the question, I will confer that with Matt. I'm not particularly sure on that crossover.
Yeah, great. Yeah, we can do that. We can give you the question. Does anyone else have any questions? Please feel free to use the chat function if you'd rather do that. Or just jump in. Oh, another one's come in. Will vessel audits and the corrective actions be made public per the standard?
The owners of the audits would be the tuna companies, so they have, it's their discretion if they want to make it public.
So it's up to them, right?
Mm-hmm.
You would hope they would.
Yes, that's right. Yeah, if they have nothing to hide, right? And the purpose is to have continuous improvement. So I think it would be in their best favor to provide the information publicly.
A question's come in, said, not sure if this has been said, but has this been trialed yet?
The auditing?
Yes, I think the whole process. I think the person who joined that joined late, so they may have missed the pilot stage.
Yeah. So yeah, we haven't done. I'm not aware of any other signature task force members who've done the auditing. Actually, they might have done some. I think some companies have done the audits using the Seafood Task Force Code of Conduct because that has been available for the last couple of years. But based on the auditing tools in the Tuna Handbook and the self-assessment questionnaires and the assessment tool used by the third-party auditors, these was just made available. So I would say that it hasn't been used in any current third-party audits. We're about to use it. Our Trimarine is about to use these auditing tools for our next coming vessel audit.
Thank you. Do we have any further questions at all? So a lot of information there to digest, but if you do have anything,
I apologize.
No, it's very good, and it's a great opportunity to be able to ask you these questions as well.
Yeah, I would definitely suggest that when the handbook is available for download on the website, definitely I would suggest all participants to download a copy because that's a very good information and condensed version of the original 80 slides of this presentation.
Absolutely, and we can certainly share that.
Mm-hmm.
Another question's come in. Will the scheme be going forward for benchmarking through the, I guess this would be the GSSI SSCI benchmarking?
I believe so. Again, I will get back on that question and defer that to Matt because he's part of the board. So yeah, Tom, if you could write down, probably provide the email so I could get back to that person with a question.
Yep, certainly will do.
Thank you.
Any other questions at all? No? Okay, well, thank you very much. Thank you so much for joining our webinar, and a special thanks to Lady for presenting and certainly for compressing such a load of information, which in a very, very good way. If you do have any feedback or if any further questions come to mind or anything you'd rather ask offline, please let me know and I will certainly put you in contact with Lady. The next webinar takes place on Monday, the 6th of April at 4 p.m. UK time, and it will be on the GSSI Global Benchmark Tool, how it works and its importance to the Tuna 2020 Traceability Declaration. And that will be presented by Herman from GSSI. So I just say a final thank you to Lady for presenting and for all of
You're
you for
welcome.
attending. And I hope you have a pleasant remainder of your day and stay safe, everyone.
Thank you, Tom. Stay safe, everyone.